Welcome to the 5th episode of our Country Story People podcast. I'm your host, David Salomon, Sal for short. I'm talking with John Hartley, artist, musician, cultural statesman, an advocate for the Juwalpa Yalanji of the Mossman area in North Queensland. On this Anzac Day, let's not forget the frontier wars and the Indigenous Australians who fought for their land and rights. In this episode, I'm chatting with John about his musical influences and how music can help preserve language and cultural memory. We'll also talk about how songs ground us in our history and heritage and how they can connect us to our roots. Join us for a down-to-earth conversation about the power of music to honour the struggles of our ancestors and keep their stories alive. Good to talk to you again.
Good morning, David. Yalada.
It's Anzac Day today, and one of the things I'm seeing in the news this morning is how in recent decades there's been a much more remembrance and acknowledgement of frontier wars. Is that something that's happening in your area, John?
Well, not overtly, in the sense where we're gathering together in remembrance of the frontier war, but the frontier wars are never far from the front of our mind, really. When you go across or drive across or pass through certain areas of country, it's always in front of you, you know.
Reading an article, I think, in The Guardian, and it just got me thinking in my area where I grew up in southeast Queensland on the Southern Darling Downs. Our little town of Leeburn, it's called, which is really just a petrol station. I think there's a shop and quite a small town there, but at one time had quite a large population for a couple of years with the gold rush going through there. And it just struck me how the gold rushes and the frontier wars were interlinked. And it didn't last very long at Leeburn before it went to Gympie. And there were significant finds of gold at Gympie, and they called it at the time the town that saved Queensland at a time of drought. And the same had happened, a similar thing had happened in South Australia, where those early colonies were really not really very viable at all. And so one of the effects of that was the harsh attitude that those early settlers had towards Indigenous people in those areas. That's also a story for Palmer River and you, up your way, and your family, your ancestors were very deeply affected by those events, I believe.
Oh yes, yeah. The 1800s, of course, you had the Palmer River, what they termed the Palmer River Gold Rush. So you had a small town at the time that, within 3 years saw an influx of, 10,000 odd people from not only Australia, but, from all parts of the world descend on the Palmer River and then the Hodgkins River for their lust for gold. And of course, Bama Aboriginal people at the time that stood in between the gold, those seeking their fortune in gold, and were seen then as somewhat as an obstacle to be removed and dispersed, inverted commas, which is talk for murder or mass murder of our people. in order for people to satisfy their lust for gold. And the Palmer River, Juwalpa country in general, was well, is still a very wealthy country in terms of food and things like that. So it sustained, thousands of Bummer people. But in relation to Juwalpa, after the gold rush, there were only handfuls of what they term as apical ancestors left. Huge numbers of Aboriginal people. And I think across Queensland, I may be corrected on this, 100,000 casualties in regards to that. And of course the native police were highly active, particularly in the Gulf countries and around Mossman and Mowbray, the Gulf country, and Queensland more broadly too. And essentially the native police were led by white commanders, and often under the threat of their own lives or their family lives, and were essentially a hit squads, really, that went about and done the dirty work of the colonial authorities at the time. Our people fought to maintain their country, their way of life, and their future for their children against those whose only objective was to make themselves rich. And nothing would stand in the way of that. So there was many outbreaks and guerrilla war that was carried on throughout Yalanji country. But, spears and shields are no match for the Snider rifle, which they brought in. The shields and spears were no match against those kinds of technologies of the day.
I just have a sense there's a whole lot of stories that have yet to come out, or they haven't really even started to come out in any major way, that are going to describe quite a different history to the one we have told in the past. Of course, those dispossessions and dispersions, so-called, also involve, forced labour and slavery, basically, happening in all those places. So I think it's appropriate just to cast our minds, to those people who were so severely affected in those years. John, you sent me some wonderful songs for to incorporate into the website this week, and all on traditional motifs, and I thought it might be interesting for people to know a little bit about your musical history, which is you've entertained a lot of people over the years, particularly going back to your earlier time in Adelaide, I know. But I'd just like to ask you if you could tell us where your musical interest started. Did you come from a musical family, or were there people who inspired your music?
Oh yes, I'd say most definitely music ran through our family. My grandfather was a multi-instrumentalist, could pull pianos apart and rebuild them, and organs and what have you. He was a main organist at the Yarrabah church mission where he was interned for most of his young life until 21 years of age, and much of that time spent at Yarrabah. Yes, and my uncles and aunties and extended family members all have a musical streak in them. Yes, and I first learnt a bit of guitar from my uncle, my mother's older brother Les, many years ago, who taught me a couple of chords on guitar as a young person, and from there I just started gathering more chords, and I guess playing a little bit more, things like that. Yeah. So for sure, there's musical influences within the family.
And you have been a very active singer-songwriter for a long time too. I should just point out that the intro that we used for the podcast was something that you've written and performed as well. Tell us a little bit about your singer-songwriting history.
I guess a lot of my songwriting centres around history, be that family history and trade union history, histories of struggle and things like that, and stories or songs, if you like, on things that happened within my own family. My mother's own songs, Domestic Girl, which is a song about my mother growing up doing domestic service in the Daintree and Mossman areas in her very young days. I have songs like For Those Who Would Forget, which is a song about when John Howard first came into power and swiftly extracted some 500 million from Aboriginal affairs like health and what have you. He rapidly went about dismantling Anzac and all that sort of stuff. He said at the time that we should all just forget about it, referring to history and past and the black armband view, and we should all just forget about it. But so I wrote that song entitled For Those Who Would Forget as a reminder of what actually happened. And so I played around, I guess, Adelaide for a while. I was fortunate to be invited to a number of events, and not myself, but good friends Greg Blanche and Martin O'Malley. We formed a bit of a trio entitled The Wobbly Boot, and we sang around venues in Adelaide and also picket lines and different varying events around Adelaide.
So you've brought that musical ear to a different kind of songwriting now for this upcoming exhibition, where the subject matter is different. In fact, it's quite different. Can you fill that out for us, the sorts of songwriting that you've been doing more in recent times related to cultural stories in particular?
Yes, very much so. I think it's important that we rekindle in a form those songs and the language, of course, and songs and dances of country. I think it's vitally important that we do that. Some of these songs come from or arise out of stories that have been handed down. And some of the songs relate to particular features in the landscape, border areas, waterholes and things of that nature. I began to put together a number of songs in relation to that. And I think you have to keep in mind that there's all different levels of songs as there are in language. And I think you have to have some kind of understanding of those levels and those things that you're imparting. The songs that I've done lately depict general information and general stories, and I think they're very important. And from those songs and stories come the songs and the dances and symbols and paintings and what have you. Yeah.
I'm looking at some of the titles that are recent ones: Jingomo, Juwalpa, Karanji, Yaru Walonku, Bubungul Kirjin.
Mongurigin.
Ngul Kirjin. Okay. Tell us about those, the names.
Bobo Mongurigin means beautiful country. So that is, just talking about looking around and appreciating and talking about the beauty of one's country, of where you're at, you know. I guess it's when you're walking through country and you're hearing, I mean, country itself has a song, you know, and when you have all these different birds singing out, crocodiles humming and drumming, and the creaks and cracks of the cassowary and what have you, the breeze blowing through the trees. It's a song in itself, you know. Yeah. So Bubble Wongurigin is really about that, about sitting in country and going, wow, what a beautiful country.
So Bubu is the word for country?
Yes. Wongurigin is can be translated as beautiful. Yeah.
It struck me listening to some Pitjantjatjara songs when we went up to the Laura Festival with a group some years back, and one of the songs, Manda
Yiringu.
Yiringu, or same sort of thing, different language.
Yeah. Yes.
And it got me listening to the song and just sort of letting the rhythm flow and take you, you know, listening in a sort of in a deeper way, and just letting letting yourself be transported by it. It was the music that sort of opened my thinking and realization of the celebration of the connectedness of everything that is in country. The lights, you know, the colours, the smells, the sounds, the animals, the people. It was sort of quite a profound experience of it that I hadn't really appreciated through music before. But it did have that descriptive element of simply referring to the patterns and colours of nature.
Yeah.
Not just at the visual level, but at the ecological or, level as well.
Yes.
And I guess I always look for that now, having travelled quite a lot. Traditional people in the car, travelling long distances, particularly through Central Australia, it was always accompanied by song.
Yep.
It would be songs just marking the travel all the way, really. And I haven't experienced that. That's sort of, for me, one of the very precious experiences of that time of travelling with people, and the song being such a central part of that. And then, of course, around the campfire, it can take on a different or an expanded kind of expression, you know, where there's dance and so on that accompanies that. So it's sort of quite operatic, I guess, in a lot of ways. I don't know whether that's a good comparison or not. But in terms of the fullness of being transported by an artistic performance.
I guess in a nutshell, that would be, I guess, my objective. I would hope that they were in some way transportative and transformative. I would like to think now, but I'm under no illusions in regards to that. But that certainly is the thing. It's more than the lyrical content of the words, but it's how the whole song is constructed. And I only use very simple instrumentation of sticks or just percussive type sounds from the body and things like that, or to create an atmosphere. I want to see what can be created from using very simple words and very simple instrumentation.
Some music I listen to very passively, enjoy, as you say, the lyrics or the tunes or whatever it might be. But in this kind of music, it's a slightly different relationship, and I suppose because I don't understand the language, may be part of it, but you sort of give yourself to the music rather than just receive it. And there's something that happens when you give over and let the music take you somewhere. I mean, not to say that doesn't happen with other kinds of music as well, but I know it's taken me into unknown places before, that I sort of have cultural importance or content to them, and just really seeing the world in a different way, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I think our songs situate us within a particular country, in a particular time, and a particular story related to that area. I think if I'm singing, if it's about borders that I'm singing about, or particular animals and a little bit of their travels and things like that, then when you come across those particular areas, and that song comes to you, and you start to think about those travels of those old people, and I think it helps us maintain the memory of those areas, and that's, for me, is the biggest thing, that in the future, that these songs that have been written, or others that I would hope will be written by others, will go into assisting our coming generations, so that if these continue to be passed down, not only in the song form, but also in the dance form. So.
And in some cases, the storybook as well. I'm thinking Jingle is one there. I'm thinking of my young grandson and how he loves reptiles, lizards. He used to love dinosaurs, but we went up to the Flinders Ranges and we saw a whole lot of sleepy lizards, and it just sort of opened his world of lizards. So now at the age of 8, he's quite an expert on these lizards.
As they are.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking how rich it is, to have songs, and like Jingle, for example. There's a whole, what am I trying to say? There's a whole lot of art, song, story, dance, painting, that bring all that part of the natural world alive.
Oh yeah, and they spark memory too. They spark memory, like a lot of songs do. Jingle, of course, that was inspired by a story put together by Juan Walker and Bennett Walker. They worked with the local Mossman Primary School with the children there. The book was due to be released, I think, or launched in late June this year, I believe. It's a very interesting story in that you get to know a little bit about the nature of the taipan, of course, which is Jingle, the particular area of country the Jingle inhabits, and why he inhabits that particular area of country. Yeah.
And so in terms of area that it refers to, it's closely or bordering Gurindji, another of your animals up there. Tell us
Yes.
about Gurindji.
Well, Gurindji, and talking of dinosaurs, is of course a cassowary. It tells you a story of his earlier travels over to the western or over the dividing range and to sit down with his relations over in the west. Yeah, and old Gurindji was not very happy in that country because of the particular grass seeds were kept sticking to his all over his body. You know, he was not too happy about that. So he didn't stay too long. He turned around and came back to his country and realised that the rainforest was the place for him.
Mm.
A little bit vain, the old cassowary.
Yes, well, certainly a spectacular, plumage it has.
The plumage, that's the one. That's
Uh,
the word.
um, and finally, Yaru Olungu. What's that one?
So that's saying Wongwal means song. So Yaro is a rainbow serpent. So that talks about the travels of the rainbow serpent. Talks about the directions he comes from, sort of certain places he went and where he went to, and then where he ended up.
It takes me immediately to the gorge there in Mossman. And
Well, you'd not be too far wrong.
yes,
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, of course, it was one of the major features of the rainbow serpent, and if you've been to Mossman Gorge and see all the big rocks, we refer to them as the eggs of the rainbow serpent. You know? Yeah, he's well travelled throughout this country. Yes, so little things like that, but I guess it's being sensitive to what you place in the songs and finding a comfortable balance, because my songs generally deal with everyday language, of course, everyday stories, that is stories that are general knowledge, growing up from young people. Yeah, so it's general.
wonderful to talk with you again, John. Would you have a song that you'd like us to go out on today?
There's Juwalpa there.
Okay, let's do Juwalpa. We've talked a little bit about that previously. Juwalpa being a place at the northern end of your Gumriwara estate there. A place on the maps marked as Rocky Point.
Yeah, Rocky
Juwalpa,
Point.
a far more poetic name, I think.
Yeah, and the Juwal, of course, is a digging stick, place of the digging stick, or it may refer to the abundance of a certain root vegetable that was there, and still to this day too. So it's simply talking about that. It talks about how our ancestors sat there from a long time ago, and how there's plenty of food at Juwalpa.
Well, great talking with you, John.
You too, David. You have a good day.
Jaungara ngarigu bundarin jual ba mumbu